Okay. So, hi. Good day, everybody, and welcome to a Photographer Talks. During this interesting time, I decided to start up a series of talks with photographers from around the world. Ones with whom I've either worked or not, and this is the second of those talks. And today I have the great pleasure of joining me, Corey Rich. Now, Corey, from his early days working out of his dorm room and shooting on film to becoming a Nikon ambassador and official photographer of the historic Dawn Wall Ascent, Corey's been capturing iconic shots of adventure superstars for more than 2 decades. He's had the pleasure and the honour of shooting such greats as the surf legend Kelly Slater, Tommy Caldwell, Alex Honnold, and the late David Lama. Corey's work has appeared on nearly 100 magazine covers and in the pages of the New York Times, Sports Illustrated, and National Geographic. In September 2019, last year, he released his book, Stories Behind the Images, which tells all the secrets behind some of his greatest shots. If you follow me on Instagram, you will find him reading a new one out, as chosen by his daughter, every day. She is listening intently while eating her breakfast, and he does this to his followers live in the morning. He might even do one today. We can ask him ourselves. He lives in South Lake Tahoe, California, with his family, where he is currently hanging out and doing some serious downtime. Please join me in welcoming Corey Rich to your screens.
Hey, thanks a bunch. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Great to have you, man. Great to have you on the show. Have a chat. You're looking very healthy.
That's one of the upsides to being home a lot right now is I'm getting exercise every day, an abundance of exercise and outside time. It just switched. It's like the flip got switched, and it is springtime. I mean, it is spectacular right now in Tahoe, and so a lot of time hanging out at the river, outside on the deck. The trails are melting off right now. Snow is, I bet it's up to about 8,000 feet. So we can ride. There's 2,000 feet of mountain biking and walking, hiking. So it's, I have to say that despite the world being flipped upside down, when you sort of drill down and look at sort of your own circle, your own life, I think the huge positives right now are I'm just spending an enormous amount of time with, the two women I love the most, my wife and my daughter. And, I don't know if I'll ever have this opportunity again to spend 24/7, with my family. And, I should include my dog. I think our dog is in shock. Like, why is everyone home all the time?
Yeah.
She's getting to go, she's going on walks all the time. And there's
She's
people
tired of
petting.
walks.
Yeah, that's right. I think she's actually frustrated that, we're not leaving because it's harder for her to sleep on our bed. She's getting less sleep than she did pre-coronavirus world, but it's wild times and feeling healthy and feeling, trying to keep that perspective, the glass half full perspective, which is what is the upside, despite all the carnage and there's a lot of bad stuff happening right now, some pretty tough times for everybody,
Yeah,
psychologically, financially. But I think it's important to kind of remember the real upside to this, which is time that we don't, certainly in my career, in this occupation, it's hard to find this volume of time with family. And gosh, that's been pretty wonderful.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll touch on it in a little bit. But yeah, I mean, obviously the main thing that a lot of people are saying is that spending time at home with their family now is it's the one big massive change, and everyone's having to get used to it. Whether you were just a normal 9 to 5er, or you flew around the world on a regular basis. It's a
Yeah.
big change for everybody, very much so. So I mean, let's come back to the kind of tricky times really that we're in now, and let's just have a little sort of flashback to way before all this started, way before your situation now, and back to when you first started being that photographer that has sort of formed you into the person who you are now. That sort of dorm story. What was the first job, the first paid job? Because I've read and know a few stories about you sleeping out the back of a Honda Civic and things of that sort.
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you
First
sort of?
paid job. That's a good question. I for 5 or 10 years, probably 5 years, I legitimately I was making a living in photography, but I wasn't doing assignments. I was doing a ton of working on spec. And I think that was mostly because I had 3 clients. I was working for Climbing Magazine, Rock and Ice Magazine, and Patagonia, the clothing brand. But the way it worked is I would buy 100 rolls of film and I would go out and shoot like crazy, and then edit it down to my best images and ship them to the magazines and Patagonia respectively. And I would cross my fingers and sort of pray that they would like a couple of the pictures and they would license them, and then I would get another paycheck and I could buy another 100 rolls of film, and it was cyclical, and it worked. It really sped up the rotation of that cycle, accelerated almost immediately. And so I do vividly remember the first, and I was getting sent on trips. I was doing, as that evolved, I would get phone calls from Patagonia where they would ask, do you want to do an alpine climbing trip? And they would cover the expenses and they would buy the film, but I wasn't getting paid a day rate. So that was really foreign to me. And I can't pinpoint the exact assignment, the first assignment, but I know that one of the sort of biggest assignments of my early career, and it was one of the first, was a trip to the Sahara Desert to photograph an adventure race. And that, I remember negotiating, sitting in a boardroom in a big conference room in San Francisco. It's kind of in that first 5 years of, mostly shooting on spec. And, I'd been courted to go into the office to talk to this team about potentially shooting in Morocco. And I called one of my mentors on the drive into San Francisco. And, I didn't know what I was talking about. I was 20-something years old, early 20s, and I called this mentor of mine, Brad Mangian, and I asked him, what am I worth? Because I didn't know. For me, I never set out to be a business person. I've never had like a business plan or a spreadsheet. I've always, call it flawed or call it smart because I'm focused. I just don't worry about the financial side. I've always had this philosophy, which is if you just, put the pedal to the metal and like work at 110% and make sure that you're focused on doing great work, the financial stuff always falls into place. And, knock on wood, that's always happened over the last 25 years. But he told me I'm worth $1,000, and I didn't know what that meant. And I presented that at this meeting. My portfolio is getting passed around, and they said, how much do you cost? And I said, I'm $1,000. And there was a little negotiation. The kind of the vice president at the end of the table said, ooh, that's pretty steep. How about $800? And I kind of, kept it together, and I counted to 3 in my head. And he said, all right, goddamn it, how about $900? But you do realize this is 30 days. And then I realized I was talking about, $1,000 for the whole trip. And he was talking about, $900 per day. And that was the first real paid gig. That was, I was making money. I was making money licensing pictures leading up to that meeting. But that's when it all changed. It was sort of this guarantee that like, wow, I'm going to go and do 30 days of work and I'm going to get paid $900 a day for a kid who was still barely hanging on in college. I was still a student living I'd moved out of a dorm room. I was living in an apartment building. And it's, but I think that philosophy of staying hungry is the key. That's one thing that has never shifted, whether I'm shooting on spec. Shooting on spec keeps you really hungry because it's the only way you get paid. is if you perform. Like you've got to perform, you've got to outperform anyone that's next to you or competing for that space or that paycheck. And I always remind myself that whether I'm on assignment and getting paid a day rate or whether I'm shooting something on spec, the same amount of energy that, you've got to stay hungry when you go to, and you've just got to, you can never lose that, right? That's your edge as a creative person. It's that willingness to push harder than you did the day before, right? You're constantly trying to reinvent your vision and why you do it and how you do it and kind of your communication skills with your client or your subject. And so that's, I'm reminded of that. And, today I still do things on spec. If I really want to do it, I do it. And I have this philosophy, we'll figure out the money piece later. And every now and again I get burned on that. But, kind of staying in tune with that passion is important.
Of course. Do you find you're ever kind of exhausted by that consistent push? The one, you're always trying to find the next gig kind of situation. Does it ever
No,
get you down?
no, I don't think it does. I think that's part of the game. I think that I enjoy so much. It's part of the, yeah, I don't know if I've been asked that question many times and I've thought about it. I've been burnt out from travel. I've definitely been at the end of a 2 or 3 month block of travel and I'm in the last hotel room and I'm thinking, oh my God, I just cannot wait to get home. Like I'm just so cooked, I'm fried. I can't, I just want to be near friends and family. But I don't know if I've ever felt burnt out on sort of the hustle. I mean, I think I just enjoy, because I enjoy the actual act of shooting and being creative so much that it's easy to sort of keep on jogging. I mean, I guess that's it. And it's important to point out for me, I really enjoy the being in wild places and making pictures and being surrounded by, a group of people that I appreciate and they're my team members, my crew. But I would also be lying if I really enjoy the stuff that happens in the office. I enjoy the problem solving. I actually really, I said I'm not the spreadsheet guy. And if you ask my business partners, they would say, yep, Corey's not the spreadsheet guy. But I kind of in a weird way, I love it, getting on a phone call and having something blow up. And it's, okay, we have a real problem. How do we solve this problem? That's what we are. We're problem solvers.
Yeah.
And I feel that's what I do every day. I mean, I sort of get on the phone.
On every
and solve.
shoot. And every
Yeah.
shoot, I think you always have to be an extremely resourceful person to get around those issues. They're always going to pop up. They always do. And if you can't think resourcefully and outside the box, then it's not going to work, is it, really?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I mean, I love it both in the pre-production phase of kind of in the courtship of a client and in the how are you going to make it work, the logistics. And then in the field, of course, I mean, it's weird to say, but I like being under that pressure of like solving problems in real time and trying to appear unflappable, even though I'm sweating bullets inside. But the longer you're in this game, what clients are really hiring me for, or you for, or any of us, they're hiring you because you've already made that mistake and you won't make it again. And now I'm almost 3 decades into doing this. I've made a ton of mistakes. I mean, I've made every mistake in the book. And now the goal is, because I always say there's lots of photographers and filmmakers that are as talented as me or more talented than me. But what I bring to the table now at 25 years in this business is I've just done a lot of it. And I'm still hungry. I've made a lot of mistakes. I've corrected for those mistakes, and I can spot those mistakes or those issues in advance of them happening. And that costs money. I mean, the reality is when big mistakes happen, that costs clients a lot of money and pictures get missed and videos get screwed up. And so I'm always trying to really stay in tune with, my feelers are always out. It's okay, what's about to happen? I'm trying to see 3 steps ahead. And, I don't always do it, but I think I'm pretty good at anticipating, the kind of zigs and zags that we're going to experience on a job or on a production and storytelling.
Yeah. I think we can all agree on that, really. probably a good opportunity to chuck a couple of pictures up on the screen and show us how you zigged and zagged through them. If you don't mind, I'd like to really start with the ice cave shot that you tell me is
Sure.
of David Lama. So I'm going to pop that up on the screen for people to see that. Here we go. It's the image that we used in the initial marketing behind the talk. And Corey, fire away. Give us a couple of minutes on this image here.
Yeah, I mean, this is early on in my career. The phone rang quite a bit to go and shoot in the Himalayas, Everest trips and high mountains, and it just wasn't my calling. I sort of turned those trips down for the first 20 years of my career, and it's hilarious in a small world of adventure photography that there's another guy by the name of Corey Richards. We couldn't have closer names, and he did say yes to those trips to Everest and the Himalaya and has made a career out of shooting that content. But I finally, a few years ago, David Lama had called wanting to go and free climb the Trango Tower, which is in Pakistan. And it was just before my wife and I were going to have our daughter, and we sat down and talked about, was it smart to go to Pakistan? It's a pretty dangerous place, and both politically, but also the mountains are dangerous. And we thought it was the prime time to do it. And it's really a trip that I'd wanted to do since I was a teenage boy who fell in love with rock climbing. The Trango Tower and El Capitan, they're two of the greatest rock faces in the world. And I couldn't think of a better partner. David and I had been doing a lot of projects together. We'd spent 2 seasons in Patagonia. We had shot all over Europe together. And so we went to Pakistan with Peter Ortner, was David's partner, and I had 2 incredible colleagues. Remo Messina was a 21-year-old drone pilot from Switzerland, a real kind of just savant in a sense. And Andrew Peacock was an ER doctor from Australia, so they were kind of my teammates to help tell a story. And it was a pretty tall order. We were tasked with shooting a 24-minute film for television, so an episode of television. A cut down for a film festival. I think it was like a 10-minute film for a film festival, and of course shoot all the still content for Mammut, who was underwriting the project.
Yeah.
And the team at Mammut really wanted me to bring a drone pilot, and this was early in the drone. If you rewind tape to 6 or 7 years ago, you couldn't walk into a big box store and buy a DJI Mavic. I mean, it was way before that. And I was really skeptical because we had been shooting with a lot of drones, and it was just constantly, drones were crashing, and rarely did you get the footage that you wanted out of the drones. But this Remo Messina, this just genius, he came to Pakistan with us, and he brought 3 homemade drones with him. And
Wow.
and incredibly, on the day that we summited the Trango Tower, Remo flew his tiny homemade drone with the GoPro on the bottom of it. He flew it over the summit of the Trango Tower and captured footage of us climbing and then standing on top. And he did it from like a mile away, wearing ski goggles that he had modified so that he could see. And it was, this had never been done. I mean, this was groundbreaking. It was the first time that I think a drone, a homemade drone, had flown over, 22,000 feet in the Karakoram Mountains. And it got huge press. Like the footage came out, and the Associated Press picked up the story. And I remember the headline was, "The most positive drone story you'll ever read in Pakistan." It's something to that effect. And it was about, mountain climbers using a drone for good, for good purposes. But I learned a lot on that trip. That photograph of David and Peter in the snow cave. That's photographs just look so simple, right? It looks like, okay, they must have ended up at a snow cave at sunset, and Corey took a few photos. But what really happened is we got to that snow cave, 2 hours earlier, and we were super dehydrated, and we're sleeping at 18 or 19,000 feet, and it's cold and windy, and we dug out the snow cave, and as a photographer, I saw the possibility to make this picture, but I knew it was going to mean waiting for a while. And it's, when you're at that altitude and you're dehydrated, and all I wanted to do was crawl into that snow cave and start boiling water and take off my crampons and boots and harness. But I knew if I did, I wasn't going to get back out to shoot that photo. And because we were going to sleep, until midnight and then start climbing. And so I stood there and just put my chin down and let the wind blow into my face and waited and waited and waited and played the psychological games with myself, thinking about anything but what I was actually doing. I dreamt about petting my dog and getting home and buying a burrito at Chipotle. But as photographers, we have to embrace this discomfort, right? You have to embrace this idea that it's
Absolutely.
Oftentimes when you're the most uncomfortable and you're pushing yourself the hardest, it leads to the best images. And I waited and waited and waited. And it doesn't always work. That's the other important piece. I waited and waited and waited, and it made this picture. But I could have just as easily waited and waited and waited, and then it clouded up and, the exposure was off. That ambient light above the mountains didn't match the exposure of their headlamps. But it's, that goes back to that hunger idea. You've just got to stay hungry. You've got to always be pushing. And I have to remind myself all the time. I mean, especially when it hurts, when it's uncomfortable, and you'd rather be drinking coffee, watching the sunrise from your house, or having a cocktail, watching the sunset. As storytellers, as photographers, our job is to actually be out there doing it. It's waiting, looking for those moments. And guess what? Usually that's alone, and usually it's uncomfortable, and you've just got to embrace that.
Yeah, very true. And a very valid point that sometimes you can put as much effort as you think is humanly possible into it, and it still doesn't come good. But, you've got years of experience, and hopefully, all being well, it does. And obviously that shot really shows that, a bit of patience is what really does pay off. And as long as everything comes together, the stars align, then you do have a winning image. But obviously, it's not always about being on the top of a mountain and freezing your butt off. As the next image that I'd like to chat through explains or shows quite well, which is one of Bear Grylls, the kind of pretty much the most famous adventurer out there, really, currently. Now, I'm very interested as to what is behind this dirty, muddy face of Bear here, half face of Bear, even.
Yeah. It's a fun story. Years ago, and I have no sense of time, but I think it's at least 10 years ago. Bear had a hit television show, I think globally, but it was a Discovery TV show called Man vs. Wild. And I got tapped to fly down to Panama and shoot with Bear for their advertising stills. And so I jumped on an airplane and, arrived in the middle of the night. And it was a couple of hours drive out of Panama City. And we stayed in an old army barracks right on the Panama Canal. And, as is typical, I arrived at, 1 or 2 in the morning. I was brutally tired. And it was a traditional army barracks. It was like a wooden floor and a raised bed with a mosquito net over it. And there was like a squeaking fan on the ceiling. And there was a note on my bed that just said, "Be ready at 5 a.m., and it's 1 a.m. And so I had my 2 Pelican cases and my duffel bag of clothes, and I had no choice but to kind of suck it up and start kind of prepping so that I could get in a Jeep the next morning. And I did. I was down there at 5 a.m. or whatever the time was, and it was a really misty morning, and there was one yellow light kind of above the road, and pretty soon the whole crew gathered, and instantly it was a pretty small crew, a camera operator, a story producer, a director, sound person, and like a survival specialist, and Bear. And instantly I realized these guys, like, they spend a lot of time together. Like, you could just feel the energy, that they were all pretty tight, and they're all pretty competitive. And an impromptu pull-up contest happened where we're all waiting for the cars to gather, and so everyone's doing their sets of pull-ups, and I was the new guy. I barely said hello to everyone. And I'm not a TV guy, so I didn't know who Bear was, or I did enough research to understand what the TV show was all about. And anyhow, long story short, it was my turn to do pull-ups, and I, being a climber, and I was pretty fit at the time, I kind of destroyed them all. I did more pull-ups, and instantly I was in the club. It was sort of like I had validated myself, and then it made for the next 2 days. It was a blast because I was just one of the boys.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and that was, I kind of realized his cameraman at the time was like his buddy from high school, and they let me in on the joke. I was kind of in on the inside scoop, which is, Bear would eat like cow dung or something, and then he would, ask Simon, the cameraman, "Do you need me to do it again?" And Simon would say yes, even though he'd like wink at the crew, and you'd realize, no, he got it. Like, he just wanted to see his buddy eat cow poop a second time.
Nice. Yeah.
So it was fun, and that led to, Bear was getting a lot of criticism at the time. It had come out in the news that, even though he was portrayed as being this guy that was like this wild adventure, at night he would go back to the Four Seasons Hotel. And I kind of saw firsthand. It was also my first exposure into real television production, where I kind of understood, how do you shoot a 24-minute segment, and how do you, do throws for breaks, and what are all the cutaways that they need, and what's a crew look like, and what are the logistics. And I saw kind of firsthand on that first trip that, Bear was a guy that, he was living the dream. He loved being outside with his buddies, talking about survival, kind of pushing himself in his own way, eating weird stuff and talking about survival skills. And even then he had made an incredible career out of doing exactly what he loved. And, the night that we were in Panama, he stayed in the jungle while the rest of us drove back to the Army barracks.
Nice.
And so it was the beginning of a pretty fun relationship. I then met Bear kind of, all over the world, from Patagonia, Argentina, to, the mountains of the United States. And then I think the show dropped, and he kind of evolved his career. And I just last year, sort of out of nowhere, ended up working on a pretty big television show in Fiji, and it was with Bear and Mark Burnett, and it was super fun. I was kind of on Bear's unit, shooting stills and then running a photo team of photographers in Fiji. And so I ended up spending a lot of time with Bear and his team over like a 2-week period. And at one point, still everybody's into fitness, and my book had just come out, and I had a few advanced copies. So I brought that book, Stories Behind the Images, down to give Bear a copy. And one of the chapters is about this photograph.
Okay.
And, when this much time passes, you start to kind of forget, like, God, is this story correct, or did I make it better over time? Did I even win the pull-up contest, or, who won the pull-up contest? And so one evening, we're having dinner, and I give Bear the book, and then the next morning, Bear and I commit to, we're going to go and work out before we go on to production. So we show up at this little crappy hotel gym, and Bear shows up, and we're going to do his like 45-minute, whatever he calls it, Bear Fit workout, which, by the way, kicked my ass. It was really hard. He redeemed himself. I might have won the pull-up contest, but he won the workout that morning. But we're working out, and we're taking this like 60-second break, and Bear says to me, he says, the chapter was pretty good. He's like, the chapter's pretty good. And as we're going into our next, set of exercises, he says, but my memory is I beat you in the pull-up contest. He laughed. But it's, I love that. I think it's my favorite part of our careers, is that we get to meet people who are passionate about what they do, and they've made a career out of something that they care deeply about. And I think he's the epitome of that. The guy, he's a superstar right now, and he's superstar doing exactly what he likes to do.
Yeah,
that persona is who he is.
If you look at the image, you can kind of just see almost the drive in his eyes, really. I think you captured it very well. It's it just shows this sort of commitment to his cause. Obviously, great bit of mud all over the face that sort of highlights the ruggedness, the sweat, the perspiration, the water droplets. You've kind of shown this man for his true grit, really, and I think you've just explained exactly why that half face of his portrait is perfectly summarizes the guy.
Yeah, no, he's impressive. I've met few people that are as motivated and as clear with their vision of what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, yeah, clearly, yeah. He's a very, very driven guy and great shot. Really, very nicely sort of shows the strength and the power of that person. Moving on, different image entirely. This one kind of blew me away, really, especially when I understood what it was. Now, I'll let you explain. Keep it short and sweet because this is a particularly different shot here. I'm going to pop it up on the screen now. And to me, it looked like a diver. Obviously, you know, diving shots are not easy, but it looked like a diver in maybe like a really strong sunset. But actually, this is a diver.
Yeah, this was years ago. I did a shoot, a water-filled cave diving shoot. And to put it in perspective, water-filled cave diving might be the most dangerous adventure sport on the planet. It's right up there with wingsuit base jumping. I mean, it's like exploring space. It's so out there and crazy what these guys are doing. And myself and a writer, Dan Duane, one of my partners in crime, we both went down to the Yucatan Peninsula and shot with really sort of the greatest cave divers in the world, the Michael Jordan of cave diving. And this photograph is you enter these caves through a cenote, which is an opening in the limestone. And what you're actually seeing in this photograph, there was a layer of algae on top of the cenote. So it looks disgusting. I mean, I think it was green if I remember correctly. But you know, you just enter through this slime. And I had no idea because this was the first time I was shooting in this environment. But we entered through the slime and I got underwater and cleared my mask and, you know, got the water. And I looked up and it was this incredible orange light. You know, this is the sun going through that green slime, algae, and all the particulate matter in the water. And so I shot, you know, and this is not my specialty. I mean, I'm really good at hanging on ropes and being in the mountains, being underwater. I can do it, but I'm a hack of an underwater photographer. And so, you know, I felt it kind of hit me all at once when I showed up in Mexico and, you know, we sat around drinking tequila and Coronas that first night. And, you know, these legends of cave diving were telling these horrific stories of, you know, near-death experiences. And I had to come clean with the kind of Robbie Schoen, the main guy that we were working with. And I said, Robbie, can you just do me a favor? Just make sure I don't die. Like I'm probably not qualified. I'm definitely not qualified enough to do this, but I've always had this attitude, which is, you know, I say yes. I'm like, I'll figure it out. I'll persevere. I'll work harder. I'll put in more time than I'm getting paid for. And this is maybe as close as I've ever been to truly being in over my head. I mean, it was, thank God I'm not claustrophobic. I mean, it's, you know, you're literally going into caves, you know, deep, unexplored caves. You know, these guys are going miles and miles into caves where they're unexplored and squeezing through, you know, little slots and holes and they're finding, you know, they're really uncovering archaeology and unlocking history because, you know, no one has been in these caves in thousands, hundreds of thousands of years. They're finding, you know, ancient human remains and, you know, really incredible archaeological finds. But this was my favorite photo. I'll tell you, when you get into the totally pitch dark caves and you have to set up strobes and you're doing it all through kind of sign language, you know, you're pointing at put a strobe over there and put a strobe over there and you're trying to, you know, through gestures, you're trying to describe to the diver what you want them to do. It was a new level. And I had deep respect at the end of this assignment for that. There's a handful of folks in the world that are experts in shooting, not just underwater, but in water-filled caves where they're lighting everything. And my level of respect for them went through the roof. I mean, it's really, my photos were awful. This is the only picture that was good, and it was because I could use available light. My picture shot in the cave where I think I had 3 or 4 strobes, underwater strobes that I could position around the cave. You know, they were B- at best.
Oof.
And I realized that's probably not my calling. that's probably not where I'm going to spend a lot of my time, is shooting water-filled caves. But
Yeah.
hell of an experience, and deep respect for the photographers, and even more so for the cave divers.
Okay, comfortable to say then you're not going to be repeating that. Although, on the surface or under the surface, it looks as though you're not bad, really, genuinely. But as you were telling that story, my heart missed a beat. I mean, I couldn't cope with that at all. I think that would be too much. There's too much claustrophobia in there. I mean, coordinating people with strobes as well, on top of effectively fearing for your life every single second you're down there. I don't think I could do it. I mean, you're the better man, and clearly those people out there are far better than both of us put together. So a place that you're a little bit more comfortable with is obviously the wall, climbing ropes, and I think the best shot that we can talk about here is the one that you effectively say kind of launched your career. It's on the front of your book, and it's on our screen now. So, do you want to just give me 2 minutes on here?
Sure, yeah.
This is such a killer shot. I mean, this is another place that makes my heart pop out of my chest, to be honest. The thought of sleeping in one of those tents hanging off the side of a mountain is one step too far. But
yeah, this is a meaningful photograph to me. This definitely isn't a photograph that launched my career. This is just a few years ago.
Oh, apologies. Apologies.
No, that's okay. That's on the. I mean, ironically, it's probably one of my widely published photographs, and the reason is this is Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen climbing the Dawn Wall in Yosemite, which was at the time the longest, hardest free climb in the world. And but for me, I think I see this picture, and I think it's a good picture. I think it's, the light's nice, the composition's pretty good, the moment's, pretty decent. But I think for me, it encapsulates everything that I love about photography and adventure. I'm in a wild place. I'm having an experience with people that I care deeply about. Tommy, Kevin, and Brett Lowell was also on the wall with us. And this is why I started taking pictures to begin with. It was to hang out with my buddies and sit around a campfire and tell stories. And I could justify that if I could make pictures that helped communicate that story. And that's what we were doing. We were just up there, on spec. I wasn't getting paid to do this. There was no money involved. It was, I'd been shooting with Tommy for 7 years as he worked on the Dawn Wall. Each season I would go up for a few days, knowing that if I shot some decent pictures, someone would license them and it would justify my time on the wall. And in this situation, this was their push. This was the final push to actually make it happen. And, every night, the highlight was every night or every morning, because honestly, they were climbing in the night when it was cold. It was incredible to hang out with my buddies on portaledges, and we're, sipping whiskey and telling stories, and I have the opportunity to make pictures every night that were compelling. That was the dream. But then coincidentally, it was a slow news moment, and the world became captivated by this story, and it blew up. I mean, these pictures, sending from our iPhones often, these pictures just blew up and started getting published everywhere. The New York Times started doing live daily coverage of the Ascent, circulated around the globe. And so I just, I see this picture, and my first reaction is I have the memories of being up there with my buddies. And it was that perfect storm of, when it works out that you can have great memories, true adventure where the outcome is uncertain, make wonderful pictures, and the world is interested, i.e. you get paid for the pictures. That's perfect, right? That's what we're aiming for all the time. And I think this image appropriately landed on the cover of my book because it really epitomizes why I do what I do. I mean, it's all of those things: the right people, the right moments, and hopefully, you can pay the bills.
Yeah, very true. Of course. I mean, sorry for getting myself mixed up there, but yeah, the Dormois. I mean, I watched the film. It's pretty incredible. The story is ridiculous, and that does that does really evoke kind of the feeling I guess you have on such a place, this vertical piece of stone that people are trying to ascend. It's an insane story. So yeah, a nice capture, definitely, and one definitely worthy of your book. Beautiful.
Thanks.
Um, I'm gonna switch out from some shots and just have a little chat really about current times. I figure it's quite a nice thing to do. Really, we touched on it right at the beginning. COVID seems to have stumped us, really, stopped us and stopped us all in our tracks. We can't go anywhere and do what we normally do. You said that obviously you were flying around the world and going to multiple states beforehand to promote your book. Was that the last thing that you were doing before you found
Yeah.
yourself tied down in
Yeah,
Tahoe?
it was pretty wild. I mean, in the 4 weeks literally leading up to, the stay-at-home order in California, I did a 2-week photo shoot, which it was just an incredible amount of travel. But I bet we flew to 7 different states for the photo shoot in 2 weeks. I mean, it was really just sort of back-to-back flying, zigzagging the United States. I then flew home for a day and then did a second phase of a book tour and flew to another 7 or 10 states to do book tour stops. And so I think literally in the month leading up to the lockdown, I bet I visited, close to 20 states or cities and shook 1,000 hands. I mean, I think I did everything that I probably should not have done. And it felt weird near the end. I mean, I think even in the beginning of that month, as we were doing these shoots, the news was spinning up of sort of, tragedy in China, and we were wrapping our heads around what this could mean. And then during the book tour, it was really starting to set in. It was really, but I was sort of, my last stop was in New York City, and I went out to dinner with some really close friends, photographers, Keith Lazinski and Amy Vitale, and some friends at Nikon. And we all sat in Manhattan one night having drinks. And I remember when we all met in the lobby of the hotel, Amy is one of my very close friends, and I went to give her a hug, and she sort of did, like the froze, because I think it was just registering. It was sort of like, wait, should we be touching each other? Should we be hugging? Should we be, shaking hands? Should we? And I remember it was pretty eerie flying home that night. Like, it felt different. Like that, I got on a plane I guess it was the next night, and flew home, and people were wearing masks. I hadn't seen that happening yet. And so, yeah, it was pretty surreal entry into the world. So I'm pretty convinced. I felt pretty healthy when I got home. But I must be like I'd be blown away if I didn't have COVID-19 at this point. I mean, I just feel like I was primed to do it. I mean, I did everything that I probably shouldn't have done.
Yeah, exactly.
But, there's no testing in the United States, so I have no idea whether I had it or didn't. But, we've definitely been on lockdown long enough at this point that, if I was contagious, that's long since passed.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, yeah, where I live currently, I live next to a hospital on a road with lots of doctors, and some of them have got it. It's out there. It's still going on, which is obviously scary for what on earth the future will hold. I mean, in the time since you've been at home, since you've maybe or maybe not had it, what have you been doing? Have you been doing any personal projects? I know that you've been building a pretty amazing tire swing.
Yeah.
But have you actually done any other kind of photographic projects, or any not even photographic projects?
Yeah. My world is, I'm no longer just a photographer, filmmaker. I'm also a partner in a production company called Novus Select, and it's been really busy. We had to pivot I have to kind of wear 2 different ball caps. One, the creative guy, Corey, that likes to go out and shoot, and then the business owner, Corey, that we have a staff of, 15 full-time employees. And as soon as those employees went remote, and we watched our production calendar, literally just everything get knocked off the calendar. There have been some pretty stressful conversations with my business partners around what happens? Like, what are we going to do? And we immediately, we've done a few things. We sort of instantly went to 80% time and 80% pay, because we kind of immediately looked at what's our runway. Like, if work doesn't come in, we have an incredible staff and we didn't want to lose anyone. And so we instantly for a month went to 80%. We also really started kind of, turning every stone, shaking the tree to figure out what does that new production model look like while we're, stuck at home and everyone's working remotely. And, and we also started to really forecast, when are we going to travel again? Because we're a business that's dependent on production. And we watched, our spigot for production was pumping water out. I mean, we were pumping productions. I mean, we had so much going on, and virtually overnight it went to zero.
Yeah.
And so we have managed to be creative and spin up some production to sustain us while we're all working from home. And a lot of that's post-production. It's editing, a lot of editing work. It's a lot of interview work, but that much like what we're doing, FaceTime-based or Skype-based interviews, where the content, the output might not be known at this point, but we need to capture it in the moment. We have photographers. We're just commissioned, probably close to 10 photographers to work from home around the globe, documenting what work from home looks like and what education, remote education looks like. And so, but it's tough. I mean, it's the first time in my career as a creative person, but also first time in my career as an owner of a production company with employees, where there's literally no production on the calendar, traditional production on the calendar. And it's really hard to forecast and anticipate when that pipeline will spin up again. When we're going to see, and will it ever spin up again in the same way that we've been accustomed to? So we're trying to adapt. We're trying to be realistic. And so a lot of my time, to your original question, a lot of my time is going into the kind of planning. It's really, how are we going to do this? What opportunities are out there? What does this mean for our staff? Certainly, I'm trying, I guess to the other half of your question, am I doing anything that's creative? It's less shooting. I'm always shooting. I'm always shooting pictures at home. I always have a camera out. I'm always picking it up and making images of my family and friends and, dog, and, shooting off of my deck at sunrise and sunset. But I've definitely taken the opportunity to, and you alluded to reading chapters of my book to my daughter. I love doing these kinds. I mean, the idea of having conversation and sharing and teaching, I'm just 100% game to do anytime. I'm a firm believer in education and sharing and kind of raising the bar and standing on the shoulders of those who have come up before us. And so that's what I'm really capitalizing on. And we're pretty close to committing to doing an audio book version of my book.
Okay.
And
great.
And it's just the prime time to do it, because I'm sitting here.
Yes.
With I shouldn't say with time, because I actually feel crazy busy.
Yes.
Like, I feel like I wake up and it's nonstop until 5 o'clock when it's my turn to go and play with Layla and be a dad. But I feel like I'm not traveling, so that's giving me a lot of time. Like, I'm not leaving on weekends. I'm around.
Yeah.
So that's what life looks like right now for me.
Coming to your point about productions, do you see I mean, obviously there's going to be a lot of changes about the way we do things and the way they're executed. Likely less getting on planes and traveling to the location. But do you see much of a change predicted in sort of remote shooting? So you referenced obviously getting these photographers in various states to capture various content at home. I've had contact myself from a couple of stock agencies about shooting similar content, about going out onto the streets and videoing in certain scenes of empty streets and what have you. But do you see a kind of a point where you're almost remote directing? So there could be a situation, if things are freed up, we're not going to be able to move as much as we have been used to, but you could potentially take a photographer, a video film guy, send him to a location to film someone in particular, and sort of, if you will, direct them from your phone
Yeah.
at the same time.
Sure. No, I think that's in the future. I mean, I do think it's going to be a hybrid of what works best in each situation. I certainly see a world where I'm not sure how practical it is to be like tuned in via FaceTime as someone's trying to work. I think the skill of briefing someone in is more important. I think it's if I'm going to send a filmmaker to go and shoot something for me, I think it's the advance time that's really going to count. I mean, I think I can see some value in having a FaceTime call going the whole time and talking, but I think it's even more important that you really spend time in advance with that filmmaker or photographer to just make sure that they're briefed in, and you're hiring the right person, right? It's empowering them to go and shoot the right content. I do think in that world, whether I'm tuned in via FaceTime or whether they've just been briefed in and I've given them style guides and shot lists and really had deep conversations around what my expectation is, I think there is going to be a lowering of the quality bar.
Yeah.
There's just a real, I think we're seeing that right now. We're seeing late night television shows get filmed on iPhones, in celebrities' homes, and there's an authenticness and a rawness to that content
Absolutely.
that's admirable, but it's kind of painful to watch over time. Like that, sometimes that polish, the polish is actually when content is a bit more polished, it values your time. I think the more raw content, there's just a lot more the clock's just ticking and it's sort of get to the point. Like I just give me the highlights. And I think we're going to see an adjustment of the quality bar if we can't be as critical in the field and we can't be as collaborative in post and it's less efficient. The beauty of an editor and a director sitting in an edit suite together adds enormous amounts of efficiency, and that creative collaboration makes for better content.
Definitely.
And that same collaboration in the field, a director and a filmmaker or a client and a photographer, really does oftentimes lead to better content. And I think we're gonna give a little more rope. We have to. We've just got to. There's going to be more freedom and it's going to be a little looser. And I think the expectation for what comes back from photographers and filmmakers in this moment in time, we're just going to be a little less critical because we just don't have that creative control and that collaboration in the way that you have when you're standing elbow to elbow with someone.
No.
But I think if you can adapt and sort of figure out how to do that and have that flexibility and that mentality, I think there's going to be opportunity because we still need content. That's for sure.
Yes.
Creation of content's not going away.
Especially if we're all going to be at home far more. I'm sure the viewing figures for the likes of Netflix and Hulu and every other streamer, as well as every other territorial channel, have probably skyrocketed. Sign-ups and so forth, because people do want to do that. I mean, a good proportion of people like to sit and watch something. Now, if that can't all be filmed at 4K and cut beautifully, there will have to be a certain change in acceptance of quality. The way it's done.
Absolutely.
I think it will be very interesting to see what happens as time pushes on. What sort of comes out of the likes of Netflix and BBC and Hollywood studios and so on, and also how much stuff they've got backed up and how much stuff they'll re-release.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
To keep the levels even a little bit. The rough cut shot at home versus the polished. So we'll see. We're cruising on for kind of close to an hour now, so I think maybe it might be a wise idea to sort of look to wrap this up slightly. We've touched on a huge amount of topics. I thought what might be quite nice to do as a kind of a couple of passing gestures is sharing any little kind of camera photography trick tip or trick for all those people at home who, like you and I, wield cameras but are looking for something different or interesting to do. Maybe a little home hobby or a little idea for a mini project. Have you got any crazy little thing you'd like to chuck out there?
I think the best advice, and I think people could give me this advice and it would have meaning. And I think this applies to professionals, to amateurs, to students, to enthusiasts. We as photographers, we love to talk about photography. We love this interview. We love this stuff. I mean, it inspires us. But I always have to remind myself that like the number one tip, the most important thing is, despite how much you read about it, and despite how much you talk about it, and despite how much you look at pictures, the best part is taking pictures. You've got to pick up your camera every day and make pictures. I don't give a shit what you're shooting photos of, but you've got to shoot pictures every day. And that's the true joy, right? That's the spirit of doing this. I don't care if you're shooting your dog, your kid, the house, details of your carpet, fruit in your kitchen, cooking, whatever it is you're shooting, self-portraits in the mirror. You've got to take pictures every day. That is the number one bit of advice that I've ever been given and that I give is every single day. If your goal is to be a better photographer, your goal, whether it's to just improve your creativity or whether it's to kind of get paid more as a career, it's like any other muscle in your body. Unless you exercise it every day, it atrophies. And the way you tune that muscle, that creative muscle, is you lift that camera to your eye and you look through that viewfinder, either horizontally or vertically, and you refine that muscle memory of doing it over and over and over and over again so that it just feels natural and second nature. And that is the number one most valuable piece of advice, which I have to remind myself oftentimes that there's no excuses, there's no reason not to do it. It's you take pictures every day. That's it. And when you take pictures every day, and you push yourself every day. You try to push beyond what you did the day before. And if you do that over, a month, a year, a decade, 3 decades, that's how you really find perfection, where you continue to strive toward perfection and you make a couple of nice pictures in that process. But it takes that, and that's where the true joy is born out of.
That's very, very beautiful advice. In fact, I myself have been taking the time to teach my daughter how to shoot pictures, and she's been using one of my old 5Ds down here. You can't really see it in the picture. A 5D Mark 1. Look at that. And I've been teaching her how to use it, manual focus, do her editing on the computer, and we're building a website. So,
wow. That's awesome. That's a gift.
It's about taking pictures, and we've got a little series of RGB, which I thought was kind of cool. She has to shoot pictures in red, of just red things, pictures of green things, and pictures of blue things, to understand the color space. And she keeps asking me, when can we do blue? When can we do blue? So we've got blue to do.
That's really cute.
Yeah, it's
That's awesome.
Great. Yeah, and it'll be soon time for you to do that with Layla.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So I think we'll look at wrapping it up there. I think I'll put one image up on the screen as we part. And what I thought I might do actually is put up the shot from a course that we did together for Creative Live. Now I've put the link to it in the description of this talk. It's a shot of BMX rider Corey Martinez doing his thing in Woodward, and it's off the back of a course that Corey taught for a project I was doing at Red Bull at the time. And I think maybe your parting kind of comment here would be how you got this shot here, because actually I can't even remember the place being as good as this.
Yeah,
if I'm honest.
yeah. Well, my memory of that shot is I really love teaching, but I've always had a really hard time shooting pictures at the same time that I'm teaching. And I've watched, I've gone to a lot of photography workshops and been a teacher at a lot of photography workshops. And I've always had a really hard time bridging if I'm teaching, I'm totally dedicated and I'm just talking and showing and sharing. But I've watched photographers where, frankly, it appears they don't care about the teaching. They're just there to shoot. And if people want to watch them shoot, that's how they do it. And I think this was the first experience because I actually had to make some pictures. That was kind of the style of the Creative Live, Red Bull collaboration. And I found myself through subtle sort of psychological adjustments getting into that mind space where I could explain to the students what I was doing, but then sort of flip the switch and be creative for 5-minute blocks at a time. And it was funny because I remember I could actually start shooting, but I still had to be talking to the camera. So as I'm shooting, some garbage is coming out of my mouth. I don't know what I was saying during those 5-minute blocks of actually trying to focus on being creative, but it comes back to that muscle memory, right? If you do it enough, you can sort of do it even while talking. It's kind of the walking and chewing gum and catching a ball at the same time. That's where it pays off. And I remember thinking when I shot that photograph, boy, this was like a breakthrough for me. It's not the greatest photograph of my career by any means, but it was a moment in time, an important kind of pin in my career, in that it was the first time that I had ever taught, which I'd done a lot of, but I also made a picture that I was proud of simultaneously. And I've since then I've learned how to sort of shift from teaching to creative, sort of in blocks of time, but that comes through practice. And so and Corey was awesome, and the crew was incredible, and the staff was, it was a fantastic project, and I was thankful that you guys tapped me to do that. And it was the funniest part of that story, which Chase Jarvis and I have laughed about a few times. I've done a few of these Creative Live events for Chase, and after I did the first one, it was a monster. I mean, it was a big project. I taught for like 3 or 4 days, and I was destroyed after it. But you're sort of like on television or on camera for 6 hours a day, and I swore I'd never do another one. And then the way that I got lured into doing that project with you was Chase sent me an email, and he said, "Hey man, how are you doing?" He's one of the greatest salespeople of all time, and his email started with, "Hey man, how about I come to Tahoe, and we team teach an adventure action sports workshop." And my reaction was, if Chase is going to come and do the heavy lifting, I'm in. That sounds great. And I think I replied with it, "Just to confirm, Chase, so we're going to team teach it." And he's, yeah, we got this. And then months passed with no reply from Chase. And then about a week in advance, I finally called Chase and I said, "Hey man, should we talk about how we're going to do this or the curriculum?" And he said, "Oh yeah, let's talk it through." And he said, "But dude, I've got to break the news to you. I can only be there for the first hour of the first day." And I thought, God damn it, here I am. I got sucked back into doing this. I got sold ice in Alaska. But in the end, I mean, I laughed with Chase when I saw him a couple of months ago. I told him the story, and in the end, I was thankful because I did learn how to teach and enjoy it, because I could be creative at the same time, and that just takes repetition, like anything else in life.
It does, yeah, it does. Well, from my memory, you did a great job.
Well, thanks.
And we're still talking, so something went right, somewhere. All right, I'm going to finish with that shot on screen. My final parting question: one thing that you think will change forever as a result of COVID?
It's a really, really good question. I hope this is maybe more wishful thinking. I'm reading news articles about kind of our new normal. And I just read an article about how airlines are not going to utilize middle seats. That would be the greatest outcome of COVID-19 if all of the airlines were forced to take their middle seats out. That would be incredible.
I love it. Great. Nice. Very wise passing words. Thanks, Corey. Thanks very much for taking the time to come on here and have a chat all the way from Tahoe. Now you can go and start your day when I'm going to go and finish mine. Keep safe, stay healthy, and enjoy the rest of the time at home while you have it. because who knows where we're going to be going forward. But
True. You
great
too,
having you
Charlie.
on.
Thanks for having me.
Take care of yourself, dude.
Thanks. You too. All right. I hear a little girl upstairs running around.